Quebec's Commission on Electoral Representation presented a 173-page report. It was tabled in the National Assembly on Tuesday afternoon. In a nutshell, Quebec's electoral map is due for some changes, some interesting changes. One riding in Montreal, poof, goodbye. Another in Gaspé, poof, goodbye. And some new ridings are proposed at the same time. Geoff Kelley, longtime Liberal MNA, now enjoying the retired life, is on the line. Geoff, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Elias. How are you?
I'm good, Geoff. So first things first, this is serious stuff, right?
Yeah.
And also, you want to make sure decisions like this are really, really independent from political interference. Based on your experience in politics and how it works in Quebec, what should our listeners know about the process to change the electoral map?
Well, first, it's always one of the most unpleasant moments in the Assembly because it's this weird cocktail of very important broad principles about one citizen, one vote, and making sure that people's votes more or less have the same impact on the outcome of an election. But there's a huge element of self-interest because the boundaries of my riding got me elected in the first place, so I don't want to change them too much because what works for me, I'd like to see it going forward. So it's always, it pits region against region and all sorts of interests, so it's a very tricky thing. But the strength of at least our systems here in Canada is we have this independent commission. They're appointed by the National Assembly, but they come up with a proposal which is based on, amongst other things, the law and the jurisprudence from the Supreme Court of Canada to try to make the system as fair as possible. And then they consult, and that consultation started yesterday when they tabled it in the National Assembly. So over the next few months, there'll be lots of arguments about what the changes are and whether they take into account the various principles in play.
So let's take a look at some of the things at play here. You know, the changing demographics and where Quebecers live. We would see under the changes that were proposed, Anjou Louis Riel, which is a CAQ riding, used to be a longtime Liberal stronghold. It was won by the CAQ in the last election. That'll go away. Gaspé, by the way, apparently they'll lose a riding in that part of the province. But Geoff, I guess the issue here is you want to try and make sure that every single riding represents about the same number of people, but then you've got these geographic concerns as well. So how well do we do it in this province, all things considered?
Well, there was a Supreme Court ruling, I think, in the late 1980s, the Carter decision, which gives the provinces a margin of up and down 25%. So to take into account distance and geography and so on and so forth, let's say if the average is 40,000 electors per riding, you can go as low as 30 and as high as 50, and you're still within that 25%. I mean, those are round numbers. Those aren't the exact numbers, Elias, but to give you some sort of idea that's what the Supreme Court ruled, I think in 1988, that you can go up or down 25%. So there are a couple of ridings in Quebec where being below 25%, we've always had a riding called Les Îles de la Madeleine. Yes. And I think they're, about 6,000 electors at most on Les Îles de la Madeleine. But because it's in the middle of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, because access is difficult, we've always permitted that comté d'exception or special circumstances for that. The second one is Ungava, which is northern Quebec. I think it's almost 60% of the land territory of Quebec, but it's well below, I think 41% below the average in Quebec. So I can see those two ridings as being les comtés d'exception or special cases. Where it gets a bit more tricky is there are a bunch of other rural ridings, 6 in total, that are also below the 25% threshold. 2 of them are involved in the changes that are proposed, Gaspé and Bonaventure, which are in eastern Quebec. But there are other regions of Quebec, like the Abitibi, which are overrepresented if you take that principle. Now, when I would say that to my colleagues who came from Abitibi, I wasn't very popular.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You know, and in Montreal, I mean, it's always sad to see ridings disappear on the island of Montreal. I think 20 or 30 years ago, there were 32 ridings on the island of Montreal. With this proposal, that would fall to 27. But if you look at where the population shifts have been in the last 30 years, people are leaving the island of Montreal and moving first to Laval and then beyond the Couronne Nord et Couronne Sud. So there's an awful lot of growth in places like Mirabel and Chambly and Saint-Julie. So the moving around in the greater Montreal area reflects those changes.
And that's an important point, right? So if Montreal Island may have lost some seats over the last 30 years, but I remember doing this exercise in the last election when I looked at Montreal, South Shore, Laval, North Shore. It was, it's half the population of Quebec, and it was half the seats.
Yeah.
So, because I hear this all the time, people believe that Montreal gets the shaft on political representation. What about does the island of Montreal, and you look about the variability, 25% lesser more. Overall, is Montreal fairly represented in Quebec City?
I think so. I mean, the island of Montreal, in fact, is slightly below the provincial average if you take the 28 current ridings. So,
Gotcha.
And as I say, if you look at the South Shore, you look at the North Shore, you look at Laval, add them all together, the whole metropolitan area of Montreal still has a lot of clout in Quebec City. There are a couple of exceptions, as I say, the Gaspé and the Abitibi being two, where they fall below the 25% threshold. So those are the questions that need to be looked at. But by and large, Montreal, I think, gets its voice heard in Quebec City.
Let me just ask you one last thing here. At times we look south of the border, and we hear stories in congressional districts and other local races how the ridings, or they would call the districts, are like they're chopped up. They're gerrymandered is the term, right? Yeah. Does that kind of thing happen here? Can it happen here?
No. Yeah. I mean, because in the United States it's unbelievable because it's the state representatives, Democrats and Republicans, they draw up the map themselves. There's no independent commission to guide their work. Mm-hmm. So obviously you've seen a tendency over time for the House of Representative districts in the United States. The Democrats make the Democrat ridings districts even more Democrat, and the Republicans do the same. So it really has had, and they don't even necessarily have districts. They're contiguous. They're not all in one spot. So I'll take a few streets over there, and then I'll skip a few streets because they're not my people,
Crazy.
And then I'll carry on a little bit further on. So the system in the United States, where the politicians are setting up the rules of their own game, that's not a model to follow.
Yeah. No system is perfect, but I will take our system.
Got that right.
Geoff, listen, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate you catching up with us here.
Okay, good talking to you a lot.
That's Geoff Kelley, was a former Indigenous Affairs Minister in the Liberal government, longtime Liberal MNA.